My name is Abigail. I'm 28 years old and I've had burn scars on my arms and neck since I was 7. Last summer, my parents held their annual garden party in their picture-perfect suburban home. Despite years of their subtle shame and my sister's not-so-subtle disgust, I decided to wear a sleeveless dress. I thought maybe this year would be different. I was wrong, but what happened next changed everything. Before I continue this painful memory, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt judged for something you couldn't control. The invitation arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon. Thick cream-colored cardstock with gold embossed lettering announced, the annual summer garden soiree, hosted by Thomas and Margaret Wilson. No personal note. No phone call, just a formal invitation sent to their daughter as if I were any other guest. I stood in my apartment hallway staring at it, feeling the familiar knot forming in my stomach. Last year's party flashed through my mind. My mother had greeted me at the door with a quick once-over and whispered, "Abigail, I thought you would wear something with sleeves. It's not that hot today." It was 92 degrees. I had spent the entire afternoon watching everyone else in sundresses and short-sleeved shirts while I sweated in the lightweight cardigan my mother had, thoughtfully, kept in the coat closet for such emergencies. I placed the invitation on my coffee table and sat down at my computer to finish the website design I was working on. As a freelance graphic designer, I'd built a successful career that allowed me to work remotely. My clients loved my work but rarely saw my face, a convenient arrangement that spared me from the sideways glances and awkward questions that often followed in-person meetings. My apartment was my sanctuary, a small but open loft with industrial windows that flooded the space with natural light. The walls were covered with artwork, some my own, others from artists I admired. No family photos interrupted the peaceful aesthetic. The only personal image was a picture of me and my best friend Rachel at the Grand Canyon. Both of us smiling with our arms spread wide against the vast landscape. In that photo, I wasn't thinking about my scars. Rachel never made me think about them. Every Thursday, I saw Dr. Marissa Fletcher for therapy. We'd been working together for 3 years, gradually unpacking the confidence issues that stem from my family's treatment. Your parents' reaction to your scars taught you they were something shameful, Dr. Fletcher had explained during one session. But that was their inability to cope, not a reflection of reality. After receiving the invitation, I brought it up during our session. "Are you planning to attend?" Dr. Fletcher asked, her kind eyes studying my reaction. "I should, right? They're my family." "That's not what I asked, Abigail. Do you want to go?" The question hung in the air. Did I want to go? No. Did I feel obligated? Absolutely. I think part of me hopes that someday they'll just accept me, I admitted. That evening I called Rachel. The annual garden party invitation arrived, I said without greeting. "Ah, the summer festival of passive-aggressive comments." Rachel replied, "Are you going to grace them with your presence?" "I think I have to. But would you come with me? As my +1? "Obviously. I wouldn't let you face the Wilson family gauntlet alone," she said. "Besides, your mom always has those amazing little cucumber sandwiches." Rachel's loyalty made me smile. We'd been friends since college when we were paired as roommates. She'd never once made me feel self-conscious about my scars, not even on our first meeting. The weekend before the party, Rachel and I went shopping. We entered a boutique with flowing summer dresses displayed in the window. "What about this one?" Rachel held up a yellow sundress with thin straps and a sweetheart neckline. "My mother would have a conniption," I said, running my fingers over the fabric. "Exactly why it's perfect." Rachel grinned. "Abigail, you have nothing to hide." In the dressing room, I slipped on the dress and studied my reflection. The scars on my arms were fully visible, pink and textured against my otherwise fair skin. The ones on my neck peeked out as well, climbing up from my collarbone like ivy on a trellis. I'd lived with these marks for 21 years, but my family acted as if they were fresh wounds that might frighten the neighbors. "What do you think?" Rachel asked when I emerged. "I think it's beautiful," I said, surprising myself. "But I'm not sure I'm brave enough." "Let's practice," Rachel suggested. She put on her sternest face. "Abigail, don't you think something with sleeves would be more appropriate?" I straightened my posture, channeling the confidence Dr. Fletcher and I had been working on. "Actually, Mom, I'm quite comfortable. It's summer after all." We spent an hour role-playing potential comments and my responses. By the time we left the store, the yellow dress was wrapped in tissue paper in a shopping bag. And I felt a glimmer of courage. The morning of the party, that courage wavered. I stood in my bathroom, dressed but paralyzed. My phone rang. Rachel. You're thinking about canceling, aren't you? She asked. How did you know? Because I know you. Listen, Abigail, you're beautiful. Your scars are part of your story, not something to hide. And if your family can't see that, it's their loss. But it's easier to just wear sleeves and avoid the drama, I said quietly. Easier for whom? For them. Why should you be uncomfortable so they can pretend their daughter doesn't have scars? That's not fair, and you know it. She was right. I knew she was right. An hour later, I was driving through the winding roads of Maple Hill Estates, where my parents' Georgian-style house stood imposingly at the end of a circular driveway. Cars already lined the street, luxury sedans and SUVs that announced the affluence of the guests. I parked my modest Honda and checked my reflection one last time. You can do this, I whispered to myself and stepped out into the sunshine. The garden was exactly as I remembered from every summer before, perfectly manicured grass, strategically placed flower beds bursting with color, and white tints offering shade from the June sun. Waitstaff in crisp black and white uniforms circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. My parents spared no expense for these events, which served more as networking opportunities than actual celebrations. I spotted my mother immediately. Margaret Wilson was a striking woman in her early 60s with expertly colored blonde hair, and the kind of posture ballet dancers envied. She was engaged in conversation with the wife of the local bank president when she saw me. Her smile faltered for just a moment, a flash of dismay that most would miss, but I had become expert at detecting. Abigail, darling, she air-kissed near my cheeks. Careful not to smudge her lipstick. You're here. Her eyes dropped to my exposed arms, then quickly back to my face. I see you've chosen quite a summery outfit. It is summer, mother. I replied, my rehearsed confidence already beginning to crack. Indeed. Well, your friend couldn't make it. Rachel will be here shortly. She had an errand to run first. My mother nodded distractedly, already scanning the crowd over my shoulder. Your father is by the rose garden with the Hendersons. You should say hello. And Jessica just arrived with Bradley. As if on cue, my father's booming laugh carried across the lawn. Thomas Wilson had the charismatic presence of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. His silver hair and tailored suit projected success and authority, the perfect image for the retired corporate attorney he was. There's my girl, he called when he saw me, excusing himself from his conversation. His hug was brief, a perfunctory gesture before he held me at arm's length. You look, well. Come say hello to Robert and Diana. Robert's firm just merged with Jackson and Associates. Before I could respond, he was guiding me toward the couple, his hand carefully placed on my upper back rather than my exposed arm. After brief introductions and mention of my graphic design work, which my father always described as computer art, he was off to greet new arrivals, leaving me in the awkward company of strangers who were trying not to stare at my scars. I excused myself and headed toward the refreshment table, needing a moment to collect myself. That's when I saw Jessica. My sister was 3 years older and had somehow inherited all the family genes for height. At 5'9", she towered over my 5'4" frame. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, accentuating her high cheekbones and clear complexion. Next to her stood Bradley, her investment banker husband, looking like he'd stepped out of a Brooks Brothers catalog. Abigail, Jessica said, leaning in for the obligatory sister hug. Brave choice with the dress, she added quietly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I dress for the weather, Jess, I replied, attempting lightness. She hummed, taking a sip of champagne. Bradley, you remember my sister? Of course. Bradley nodded, his eyes flickering to my arms and then away. Good to see you again, Abigail. Still doing the graphic arts thing. Graphic design, yes. Business is good. That's great. Niche market, I suppose. Excuse me, I see Thomas waving us over. As they walked away, I overheard Bradley murmur to Jessica, You didn't mention she'd be so visible today. I busied myself at the refreshment table, selecting a glass of white wine and a few appetizers I knew I wouldn't eat. From my peripheral vision, I could see the subtle reactions of other guests, the quick glances, the whispered comments behind napkins. I'd developed a sixth sense for when people were discussing my scars. Abigail Wilson. Is that you? My goodness, you've grown into such a lovely young woman. I turned to find Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an elderly neighbor who had lived down the street during my childhood. Unlike most people, her gaze remained steadily on my face. "Mrs. Patterson, it's wonderful to see you," I said, genuinely pleased. She had always been kind to me, sneaking me extra cookies when I would visit and showing interest in my early artistic endeavors. "Tell me all about what you're doing now," she said, guiding me to a nearby table. For the next 15 minutes, we chatted about my design business, her grandchildren, and her recent trip to Portugal. Not once did she comment on or even seem to notice my scars. It was a refreshing respite from the usual interactions at these events. As Mrs. Patterson excused herself to greet another old friend, I felt a momentary hope that perhaps the party would be bearable after all. That hope dimmed when I overheard Bradley talking to another man by the bar. "Yeah, that's Jessica's sister," he was saying. "Accident when she was a kid. Burns. Shame, she might have been pretty otherwise. Jessica says she's sensitive about it, but you'd think she'd cover up for something like this, right?" I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment and anger. Bradley had never been particularly warm toward me, but I hadn't realized he discussed my appearance with others so callously. I wondered what Jessica had told him about me over the years, what picture she had painted of her scarred little sister. I was contemplating whether I could leave before dinner when I overheard my mother's voice from behind a nearby topiary. "I do apologize for my younger daughter's appearance, Diane. She normally dresses more appropriately. I think she's going through some kind of phase. You know how it is with unmarried women approaching 30, they start making statements." The words hit like a physical blow. I had expected the usual subtle disapproval, but to hear my mother actively apologizing for my existence to her friends was devastating. I retreated to a quiet corner of the garden where a stone bench sat partially concealed by flowering shrubs. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and texted Rachel, "Where are you?" "It's worse than I thought." Her reply came quickly, "Parking now." "What happened?" I started typing an explanation when a shadow fell across my screen. "Hiding in the bushes?" Some things never change. I looked up to see Heather Blackwood, whose parents had lived next door to us throughout my childhood. We had never been friends. Heather had been one of many children who had kept their distance after my accident, as if burns might be contagious. "Just taking a moment," I said, sliding my phone back into my purse. "Mom said you were here. I almost didn't recognize you." Her eyes traveled deliberately to my scars. "Those still look painful." "Are they?" "No. They haven't been painful for years." "So what happened again?" "I remember you were in the hospital forever, but I never knew the details." Before I could decide how to respond, my mother appeared, her social smile firmly in place. "Heather, darling, how lovely to see you. I see you've found Abigail." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Sweetheart, your father is about to make a toast. We should join the others." As we walked back toward the main gathering, my mother leaned close. "Perhaps stay toward the back for the photos, dear. The lighting by the fountain is quite harsh." The guests were assembling around my father, who stood on a small decorative step with a glass of champagne raised. He beamed when he saw my mother approach but gave only a cursory nod in my direction. "Friends, colleagues, neighbors," he began. "Margaret and I are delighted to welcome you to our annual summer celebration." As he continued his practice speech about community and friendship, my mother subtly maneuvered me behind a large potted palm for the group photo. The photographer, a professional hired for the occasion, was arranging people by height. "Mrs. Wilson, perhaps your daughter could move forward where we can see her," he suggested, gesturing toward me. "Oh, I think she's fine there," my mother replied smoothly. "Abigail doesn't care for photos. Do you, dear?" Before I could contradict her, Jessica appeared at my side with a light blue cardigan draped over her arm. "I brought this in case you got cold," she said, offering it to me. "It would look lovely with your dress." "It's 85 degrees, Jess," I said quietly. "I just thought you might want to look more appropriate for the family photo," she replied, her voice low but insistent. "Mom and Dad have a lot of business associates here." I felt a flash of anger. "And my arms might be bad for business?" Jessica sighed impatiently. "Don't be dramatic. I'm trying to help you." I was faced with a familiar choice: cause a scene by refusing or quietly comply to keep the peace. For years I had chosen the latter, prioritizing my family's comfort over my own dignity. Standing there in the garden where I had spent summers trying to hide, I suddenly felt exhausted by the effort. I don't need help, Jessica. I'm not cold. She pressed her lips into a thin line. Fine. Have it your way. She walked away, cardigan still in hand, to stand beside Bradley for the photo. I remained where I was, partially concealed by the plant but refusing to retreat further. If my parents wanted to pretend I didn't exist in their perfect family portrait, they could do so without my cooperation. After the photos, I considered leaving. Rachel had texted that she had arrived but was trapped in conversation with my mother's bridge club friends near the entrance. I started to make my way toward her, determined to at least have an ally in this battlefield of judgment. When I realized that leaving now would only confirm what my family believed, that I should be ashamed that I didn't belong in public view. So I stayed, chin up, scars exposed to the afternoon sun. A silent rebellion against 2 decades of being hidden away. The arrival of new guests temporarily shifted attention away from me. A local business owner and his wife entered with great fanfare, followed by a family I didn't recognize, a middle-aged couple and a tall man in military dress uniform. My mother rushed to greet them, exclaiming over the uniform with patriotic enthusiasm. From my position near the drinks table, I could see her introducing them around the party, working her way through the crowd with practiced hostess efficiency. Eventually, they reached my corner of the garden. And this is my younger daughter, Abigail, my mother said, her hand barely grazing my shoulder. Abigail, this is Catherine and Richard Montgomery. And their son, Captain Michael Sullivan. Catherine Montgomery had a kind face framed by auburn hair with strands of silver. Unlike most people meeting me for the first time, her eyes didn't dart to my scars in a way. Instead, she maintained comfortable eye contact. That's a beautiful dress, she commented. Yellow is such a happy color. Before I could thank her, my mother interjected. Abigail works in graphic design. From home primarily. The implication was clear. I worked from home because of my appearance, not because remote work was common in my field. I swallowed my irritation and tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. Captain Sullivan, have you just returned from deployment? I asked. Michael opened his mouth to respond, but Richard spoke first. Just back from his 3rd tour. We're very proud. Further conversation was prevented by Jessica, who appeared with an older man in tow. Herbert Collins was a longtime bachelor friend of my father's, at least 60, with thinning hair and a paunch that strained his expensive suit. Abigail, you remember Mr. Collins? Jessica said with artificial brightness. He was just saying he hasn't seen you in ages. Herbert looked uncomfortable, clearly having been pressed into this interaction. Nice to see you again. Abigail, your sister tells me you're quite the artist these days. Jessica beamed as if she'd done me a great favor. Herbert collects art. I thought you two would have so much to talk about. She lowered her voice to add. Herbert doesn't mind imperfections. He always says they add character to a piece. The mortification was instant and complete. Herbert's discomfort visibly increased, and he mumbled something about needing a refill before hastily retreating. Jessica frowned after him, then gave me a look that somehow blamed me for his departure. You could make more of an effort. Abigail, she hissed before following Herbert toward the bar. I excused myself from the Montgomerys and headed for the dessert table, hoping that focusing on selecting a pastry might hide the angry tears threatening to spill. I was so distracted that I didn't notice someone approaching from the other direction until we collided. I'm so sorry, I said automatically, looking up to find myself face to face with Captain Sullivan. This close, I could see his eyes were a deep blue, crinkled slightly at the corners. Entirely my fault, he replied. I was focused on those chocolate things and not watching where I was going. A genuine smile tugged at my lips. The chocolate things are definitely distracting. Michael, he said, extending his hand. Abigail, I replied, shaking it. Before our conversation could continue, my father's booming voice interrupted as he guided an important-looking couple toward the desserts. Wilson and Associates handled the merger personally, he was saying. Though frankly, their initial contract was a disaster. Speaking of difficult situations, he continued, lowering his voice but not enough, my daughter Abigail's condition has made her quite withdrawn. Always been a challenge socially, as you might imagine. He hadn't seen me standing there, partially obscured by Michael's tall frame. When he rounded the table and spotted me, he had the decency to look momentarily abashed before recovering with a hearty, "There you are, Abigail." just telling the Richardsons about your creative work." The pain of his words, hearing myself described as a challenge and a difficult situation, was overwhelming. The party, the judgment, the constant awareness of being a disappointment to my family. It all suddenly felt unbearable. "Excuse me," I murmured, no longer caring if my departure caused comment. I needed airspace. A moment away from the suffocating weight of disapproval. I headed toward the house, intending to collect my purse from the front hall and text Rachel that I was leaving. I had almost reached the French doors when Jessica intercepted me, her expression a mix of annoyance and determination. "Where are you going?" "Dad's about to introduce you to the Sandersons. He thinks they might have freelance work for you." "I need to leave, Jess. I don't feel well." She grabbed my wrist, her fingers pressing into my scarred skin. "You're embarrassing the family. Again. By existing. By having the audacity to wear a summer dress in summer. By making everything about your scars," she snapped. "You could have worn the cardigan. You could have stayed in the background for photos. You could have made an effort to not make Mom and Dad uncomfortable in front of their friends." "My scars make them uncomfortable? They're not on their bodies. But they have to explain you, Abigail. They have to watch their friends try not to stare. Do you know how selfish it is to put them through that?" Our parents had approached during this exchange, drawn by the rising tension. My mother's face was set in the rigid smile she wore when extremely upset. "Girls, this isn't the place," she said through gritted teeth. "I was just telling Abigail that she could have been more considerate today," Jessica said. "Would it have killed you to cover up?" My father cleared his throat. "Your sister has a point, Abigail. These events are important for business connections. And I'm bad for business," I said flatly. "No one is saying that," my mother interjected, though her expression said otherwise. "But there are wonderful medical makeup products these days. I've told you about them. And I've researched some excellent plastic surgeons," my father added, as if offering to buy me a car. "The techniques have advanced tremendously. I'd be happy to help finance the procedures." Jessica's face took on a self-righteous expression. "See? They're trying to help you, and you act like they're attacking you." She looked around to ensure no one was listening, then lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. "Just cover them up next time." But her voice wasn't quite low enough. I could see from the sudden stillness of a nearby group that they had heard. The Montgomerys were among them, and Captain Sullivan stood slightly apart. His posture rigid and his expression frozen in what appeared to be shock or anger. I couldn't tell which. The humiliation was complete. My entire body felt hot with shame and rage. Tears threatened. And I knew I couldn't stay a moment longer without breaking down completely. "I need to go," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Abigail, don't be dramatic," my father said, his tone sharpening. "The Sandersons are expecting to meet you. We can discuss this later in private." "There's nothing to discuss," I replied, trying to move past him toward the gate. He stepped into my path. "You're making a scene. The photographer wants one more family photo by the fountain. After that, you can claim a headache if you must leave." The tears I had been fighting began to spill. Despite my best efforts to remain composed, 28 years of feeling like a family embarrassment culminated in this moment of public rejection. I stood there exposed in more ways than one, unable to find words through the tightness in my throat. "Perhaps your daughter would rather not be in any more photos today, Mr. Wilson." The voice came from behind me, steady and calm. I turned to find Captain Michael Sullivan approaching our family group, his bearing confident but not aggressive. Close. I noticed details I had missed in our brief encounter, a faint scar near his right eyebrow and the rigid way he held his left hand. "I don't believe this concerns you, Captain," my father replied stiffly. "Respect and dignity always concern me, sir." Michael stood beside me now, not touching me but positioned in a way that felt protective. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation." My mother's social mask slipped back into place. "Family discussions can sometimes sound harsher than intended, Captain Sullivan. We only want what's best for Abigail." "By suggesting she hide parts of herself?" Michael asked, his tone polite but unyielding. "I'm familiar with that suggestion." He extended his left hand, palm up, and I noticed for the first time the extensive burn scarring that covered it and disappeared up his wrist under his uniform sleeve. "Captain Michael Sullivan, United States Army. Third tour completed last month." He looked directly at Jessica as he continued. I got these pulling two of my men from a burning Humvee after an IED explosion. Should I cover them up as well? Jessica had the grace to look mortified. My parents stood frozen in uncomfortable silence, clearly at a loss for how to handle this unexpected development. Burns cover about 20% of my body, Michael continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Back arm hand. The Army offered reconstructive surgery, but I declined. Do you know why? The question hung in the air. My father cleared his throat. I'm sure your reasons are personal, Captain. They are. But I'm happy to share them. Michael's gaze swept over my family before returning to me. These scars represent the day I chose life for myself and others over fear. They're a map of survival. Not something to apologize for or hide away. I stared at him, seeing my own experiences reflected in his words. All these years I had allowed my family to frame my scars as something shameful, something that diminished me. But this stranger saw them differently, as evidence of endurance, not embarrassment. By now our conversation had drawn attention. Catherine Montgomery approached, placing a gentle hand on Michael's shoulder. I remember when Michael first came home with his injuries, she said, addressing my parents directly. I was devastated, not because of how he looked, but because of what he had suffered. It took me time to understand that my discomfort was my problem to overcome, not his. Several other guests had gathered nearby, including two more military families. One of the men, a veteran with a visible prosthetic leg, nodded in agreement with Catherine's words. We all carry scars, he added. Some are just more visible than others. My mother's composure was slipping. This was not how her perfect garden party was supposed to unfold. This is hardly the appropriate venue for such a discussion, she said tightly. I disagree, Mrs. Wilson, Catherine replied. What venue is more appropriate than one where a young woman is being told to hide herself to make others comfortable? I felt a strange calm settling over me, replacing the shame and anger. For the first time in my life, strangers were standing up for me against my family's judgment. The realization gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I've spent 21 years trying to make you comfortable with my existence, I said, looking at each of my family members in turn. Wearing long sleeves in summer. Staying out of photos. Accepting being introduced as your artistic daughter as if my career choice is the most notable thing about me. My voice grew steadier as I continued. You've never once asked me how I feel about my scars. You've never acknowledged that I might have accepted them as part of who I am. Instead, you've treated me as something to minimize. To explain away, to hide. Jessica started to speak, but I held up my hand. I survived third-degree burns over 30% of my body when I was 7 years old. I endured surgeries in pain you can't imagine. And instead of being proud of my strength, you've spent 2 decades being embarrassed by the evidence of it. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter with each word. I'm leaving now. Not because I'm making a scene or being dramatic, but because I deserve to be around people who don't see me as a problem to solve. I turned to Michael and his mother. Thank you for your kindness. It means more than you know. As I moved toward the garden gate, Michael spoke again. I'd be honored to walk you out. If you'd like company. I nodded, too full of emotion to speak further. The walk across the lawn felt like crossing a threshold. Behind me lay years of accommodation and apology. Ahead was uncertainty but also possibility. Michael walked beside me in respectful silence until we reached the front drive. I hope I didn't overstep, he said finally. Sometimes I forget civilians aren't accustomed to military directness. A small laugh escaped me. Directness was exactly what that situation needed. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me. Hard to miss, he replied with a slight smile. You're the only one here who looked genuine. Rachel appeared then, hurrying down the driveway. Abigail, I've been looking everywhere for you. What happened? I'll explain everything, I promised, then turned back to Michael. Would you like to join us? I think I owe you a proper conversation after you rescued me in there. Another time. Perhaps, he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a business card. My personal number is on the back. I host a support group for veterans with visible injuries. We meet Thursdays at the community center. You'd be welcome anytime. I accepted the card, our scarred hands briefly touching in the exchange. I might take you up on that. As Rachel and I walked to her car, I felt the weight of expectation lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like something new was just beginning. The week following the garden party passed in a strange blur. I threw myself into work, completing 2 website designs and starting a logo project for a new client. Rachel checked in daily, alternating between outrage on my behalf and pride in my stand against my family. "Have they called?" she asked during our Friday lunch. "Radio silence," I replied, picking at my salad. Not that I expected anything different. "And the hot captain?" I felt my cheeks warm slightly. "I haven't called him." "Why not? He literally stood up to your entire family for you. That's some fairy tale knight in shining armor stuff right there." "It's not like that," I insisted. "He was standing up for himself too. And anyway, I'm not looking for someone to rescue me." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "No, but you might be looking for someone who understands what you've been through. Someone who doesn't need scars explained to them." She had a point. That evening, I found Michael's card in my purse and stared at the number on the back. Before I could overthink it, I sent a text. "This is Abigail from the garden party. I wanted to thank you again and ask about that support group you mentioned." His reply came quickly. "Glad to hear from you. Group meets 7 p.m. Thursdays at Riverside Community Center. No pressure. But you're welcome anytime." I didn't respond immediately, still uncertain. But on Thursday evening, I found myself driving to the community center, a mix of curiosity and anxiety churning in my stomach. The meeting room was easy to find, with a simple sign reading "Visible Recovery Group" on the door. Inside, about 15 people sat in a circle of chairs. Michael stood talking to an older man with facial scarring. He looked up when I entered, a smile of recognition warming his features. "Abigail, you came," he said, crossing the room to greet me. In civilian clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, he looked more approachable than in his formal uniform. His scarred hand and forearm were fully visible. "I'm not sure I belong here," I admitted quietly. "These people are heroes. They were injured serving their country. I just had a childhood accident." Michael's expression grew serious. "First rule of this group: no trauma hierarchy. Pain is pain. Recovery is recovery. And everyone here has dealt with being stared at, being pitted, being treated as less than because of their appearance." He introduced me around the circle. There was James, who had lost an eye and suffered facial burns in Afghanistan, Maria, a combat medic with acid burn scars across her cheek and neck, Robert, missing his right arm below the elbow, and several others, each with their own visible differences. But there were also civilians: Sophia, who had survived a house fire, Derek, whose face had been reconstructed after a car accident, and Tanya, who had vitiligo covering much of her arms and face. "We all have different stories," Michael explained, "but similar chapters." The meeting began with Michael sharing updates on his readjustment to civilian life, speaking with a vulnerability that surprised me. Others followed, discussing challenges they faced that week, from job interviews to dating to simply shopping without being stared at. When it came to my turn, I hesitated, then found myself telling them about the garden party, my family's reaction, and the lifetime of subtle and not-so-subtle messages that I should hide myself away. "I've spent so long accommodating their discomfort," I concluded. "I'm not sure I know how to stop." Sophia nodded in understanding. "My own mother still suggests turtlenecks in August." It took me years to realize I wasn't responsible for managing her feelings about my burns. "Civilians often have the hardest adjustment," James added. "In the military, we're trained to be direct about difficulties. Most families never learn how to talk about the hard stuff." By the end of the meeting, I felt a connection to these strangers that I had rarely experienced before. They understood without explanation the daily calculations of living with visible differences, the mental preparation for first meetings, the decision fatigue of choosing when to educate and when to ignore, the constant awareness of being seen first as a collection of scars rather than as a complete person. As people began to disperse, Michael approached me again. "What did you think?" "It was illuminating," I replied honestly. "I've never been in a room where I wasn't the only one with scars before." "Would you like to grab coffee? There's a decent place around the corner. Unless you need to get home." The invitation was casual, his manner friendly but not presumptuous. I found myself nodding. Coffee sounds good. At the cafe, we claimed a quiet corner table. Michael ordered black coffee, I chose chai tea. For a moment, we sat in comfortable silence. "Can I ask what happened?" He finally said. "You don't have to share if you'd rather not." I rarely told the full story, usually offering the abbreviated version to satisfy curiosity without delving into painful memories. But something about Michael's straightforward question and the lack of pity in his gaze made me want to be equally direct. I was 7. My babysitter was cooking and got distracted by a phone call. I was trying to help by stirring a pot of pasta and pulled it off the stove. The boiling water and pasta spilled all over my right side. I unconsciously traced a finger along one of the scars on my arm. Third-degree burns on my arm, shoulder, neck, and part of my torso. I spent 2 months in the hospital, had skin grafts. The whole ordeal. Michael nodded, his expression attentive but not shocked or pitying. And your family's reaction? My parents were devastated, of course. They hired the best doctors, paid for all the treatments. But once the medical crisis was over, it became clear they wanted the old Abigail back, the perfect one. When that was impossible, they started treating me like something that needed to be fixed or hidden away. And your sister? Jessica was 10 when it happened. Old enough to understand but young enough to be deeply affected by how our parents reacted. She took her cues from them. If they were embarrassed by me, she would be too. Michael sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Family patterns are hard to break. In the military, we talk a lot about unit cohesion, how a team functions under stress. Some families just don't have good protocols for handling the unexpected. That's a very generous interpretation, I said with a small smile. Not generous. Practical. Understanding the why doesn't excuse the behavior, but it can help you respond more effectively. We talked for nearly 2 hours, sharing our stories in greater detail. Michael described the IED explosion that had injured him and killed one of his men. He spoke of the guilt that had initially been harder to bear than the physical pain, and how his recovery had forced him to confront deeper issues than just his changed appearance. The group saved me, he admitted. Coming home was harder than being deployed in some ways. At least in combat, the threats are clear. Civilian life is full of invisible landmines. By the time we parted ways, exchanging phone numbers properly this time, I felt a shift in my perspective. Michael saw his scars as badges of courage, physical reminders of a life-changing event that had ultimately made him stronger. What if I could see mine the same way? The following week brought an unexpected text from Jessica. "Can we talk? I've been thinking about what happened at the party. We met at a neutral location, a park halfway between our homes." Jessica looked uncharacteristically uncertain as she sat beside me on a bench overlooking the duck pond. "I owe you an apology," she began, the words sounding rehearsed but sincere. "What I said at the party was cruel and wrong." "Yes, it was," I agreed, not making it easier for her. She nodded, accepting this. "Your army friend made me realize how I would feel if someone said those things to Bradley or, God forbid, to our future children if they had any kind of visible difference. It took a stranger to make you see me as a person with feelings?" Jessica winced. "I deserve that. The truth is, I've been jealous of you for years." This was so unexpected that I laughed. "Jealous? Of what?" "Your talent. Your independence. The way you built a career doing something you love." She twisted her wedding ring nervously. "I followed the path Mom and Dad laid out: college, marriage to a suitable man, charity committees, the whole prescribed life. You forged your own way." "Because I had to," I pointed out. "The prescribed path wasn't available to the daughter with scars." "I know. And instead of admiring your resilience, I resented that you had a reason to break the rules." She looked at me directly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see how wrong I've been." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. As Jessica left, she hesitantly suggested lunch the following week, just the two of us, away from our parents' influence. I cautiously agreed. That evening, I called Michael and told him about Jessica's unexpected apology. "That's significant," he said. "Family recalibrations usually start with one person breaking ranks. You sound like my therapist." I teased. Occupational hazard. The Army invests heavily in psychological training for officers. Leading people through trauma is part of the job description. Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. I attended the Thursday support group regularly, often having coffee with Michael afterward. We texted almost daily, nothing romantic, but a growing friendship based on mutual understanding and respect. He shared articles about trauma recovery. I sent him designs I was working on for feedback. My parents remained distant, though my mother left a stiff voicemail suggesting we clear the air over lunch sometime. I wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, I focused on the connections that felt genuine and supportive. Rachel remained my steadfast ally. Jessica and I cautiously rebuilt a relationship that, while not close, was at least honest. And Michael became a trusted friend whose perspective helped me reframe my experiences. At his suggestion, I began speaking occasionally at the support group, sharing my experiences growing up with visible differences. The act of transforming my pain into something potentially helpful for others was unexpectedly healing. You have a gift for this, Michael told me after one particularly emotional session where I discussed navigating dating with scars. Have you ever thought about sharing your story more widely? You mean like a blog or something? That, or maybe speaking at schools about bullying and difference. Kids need to hear from adults who've been through what they're experiencing. The idea took root. With my design skills, creating a website was the easy part. Finding the courage to share my story publicly was harder. But the support group provided a safe space to test my narrative voice. I called it, Mapped by Scars, a digital journal exploring life with visible differences. To my surprise, within weeks of launching, I received emails from others sharing their own stories, thanking me for articulating experiences they had struggled to explain to friends and family. 6 months after the garden party incident, my life had transformed in ways I never expected. My business was thriving, my blog was gaining followers, and I had started speaking at local schools about resilience and self-acceptance. I had dinner with Jessica and Bradley monthly, Bradley's initial discomfort having evolved into awkward but genuine attempts to be more considerate. My parents had made one attempt at reconciliation, inviting me to dinner at their home. The evening had been tense, with my father offering a carefully worded apology that accepted no actual responsibility. We're sorry if you felt hurt by our concerns for your well-being. When I didn't immediately accept this non-apology, my mother had grown tearful. We only ever wanted what was best for you, Abigail. Can't you see that? I know you believe that, I had replied. But what would have been best for me was acceptance, not constant suggestions for how to hide or change myself. We had parted with an agreement to give each other space. I left the door open for a more genuine reconciliation, but made it clear I would no longer contort myself to fit their narrow definition of acceptability. Michael and I had grown closer, our friendship gradually deepening into something more. He understood my hesitation about starting a relationship, given my history of keeping people at a distance. We took things slowly, building trust through honesty and shared experiences. On a crisp fall evening, we stood together at the opening of an art exhibition I had organized featuring portraits of people with various visible differences, including several members of our support group. The photographs, taken by a talented photographer who had lost her leg to cancer as a teen, captured not just scars and differences but the whole person, their strength, beauty, humor, and humanity. This is incredible, Michael said, his hand warm against the small of my back as we surveyed the crowded gallery. Look at how people are responding. Visitors moved from portrait to portrait, reading the accompanying stories with expressions of interest and empathy rather than pity or discomfort. Several subjects from the photos circulated through the crowd, engaging in conversations about their experiences. It's about changing the narrative, I explained. Instead of scars being something to hide or overcome, they're just part of the landscape of who we are. Michael smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes in the way I had come to adore. From something shameful to something powerful. That's quite a journey. One I couldn't have made alone, I admitted, thinking of all the people who had supported me, Rachel, Dr. Fletcher, the support group members, and Michael himself. As we moved through the exhibition, greeting guests and answering questions, I caught sight of a familiar figure near the entrance. Jessica stood hesitantly at the threshold, looking uncertain but determined. When our eyes met, she gave a small wave. I nodded in acknowledgement, not yet moving toward her but not turning away either. Family? Michael asked, following my gaze. Yes. Taking a first step, maybe. Brave of her, he observed. Want backup? I squeezed his hand gratefully. No. This is something I need to handle myself. But thank you for always being ready to stand beside me. Always will be, he replied simply. That's what people who care about each other do. As I crossed the gallery toward my sister, I reflected on the strange path that had led me here. A humiliating garden party had become the catalyst for reclaiming my narrative, for finding my voice, for building connections based on authenticity rather than appearance. My scars were no longer something to hide or explain away. They were proof of survival, markers of resilience, part of the map that had brought me to this moment. And for the first time in my life, I was truly grateful for the journey. Every painful, beautiful step of it. 1 week after the gallery opening, I sat across from Dr. Fletcher in her comfortable office, recounting Jessica's unexpected appearance and our cautious conversation. She seemed genuinely interested in the exhibition, I explained. She asked thoughtful questions about the portraits and actually listened to the answers. It felt different. Different how? Dr. Fletcher prompted. Like she was seeing me, really seeing me for the first time. Not as her scarred little sister who needs fixing, but as a whole person with something valuable to offer. Dr. Fletcher smiled. That's significant progress, both for her and for you. How do you feel about where things stand with your family now? I considered the question carefully. Jessica texted me twice this week, just casual check-ins, but that's new. My parents haven't reached out since our awkward dinner last month. And how do you feel about that? Surprisingly okay. I admitted. I've spent so many years seeking their approval, trying to compensate for being a disappointment. It's liberating to step away from that dynamic. We discussed boundaries and expectations for moving forward with my family relationships. Dr. Fletcher helped me articulate what healthy interactions might look like, and how to maintain my emotional equilibrium if those expectations weren't met. As I was leaving, she said something that stayed with me. Abigail, you came to me 3 years ago wanting to build confidence despite your scars. Now you're building a life where your scars are part of your strength. That's remarkable growth. Later that afternoon, I met Michael at a quiet cafe near the community center. We had fallen into the habit of having coffee before the Thursday support group meetings, creating a pocket of calm connection in our increasingly busy schedules. How was therapy? He asked as I slid into the seat across from him. Clarifying, I replied. We talked about family boundaries mostly. Always a complex terrain to navigate. He nodded, pushing a chai latte, my favorite, toward me. There was an ease between us now. A comfortable familiarity built over months of honest conversations. Michael knew my insecurities and my strengths. I understood his struggles with civilian transition and his dedication to helping others through their recovery journeys. I've been thinking about your suggestion, he said after a comfortable silence, about expanding the support group to include sessions specifically for families. After the gallery opening, we had discussed how many of our group members struggled with family relationships. The parents, siblings, and partners of people with visible differences often lacked guidance on how to provide support without overstepping or inadvertently causing pain. I think it could be transformative, I agreed. But would people come? Some would. Others wouldn't. But having the resource available matters. He hesitated, then added, I was hoping you might co-facilitate. Your perspective as both someone with visible differences and someone navigating complicated family dynamics would be invaluable. The suggestion caught me off guard. I'm not a trained counselor. Michael, neither was I when I started the group. Sometimes lived experience is the most important qualification. He reached across the table, his scarred hand covering mine. You have a gift for helping people feel seen and understood. I've watched you do it at every meeting. I promised to think about it, touched by his confidence in me. As we walked to the community center for that evening's meeting, Michael mentioned that several new members would be joining us. Veterans? I asked. Some. Also, a few civilians who saw the gallery exhibition and reached out. Your work is already having an impact, Abigail. The meeting room was more crowded than usual. I recognized several faces from the exhibition opening, including a young woman with facial birthmarks who had spent a long time studying her own portrait. When it came time for introductions, she identified herself as Natalie. I've never been in any kind of support group before, she admitted. But seeing those portraits made me realize I'm not alone in how I feel about being stared at everywhere I go. As the meeting progressed, I found myself speaking more than usual, responding to questions and sharing strategies I developed for handling uncomfortable social situations. Without consciously deciding to, I had stepped into a more active role in the group. After the meeting, Michael's knowing smile told me he had noticed the shift as well. Still think you're not qualified to co-facilitate? Point taken, I laughed. The following week brought an unexpected text from Jessica. Mom asking if you'll come to dinner Sunday. Just immediate family. She seemed sincere about wanting to talk. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that accompanied any interaction with my parents. After discussing it with Dr. Fletcher, I decided to accept but set clear boundaries. I would drive myself so I could leave if necessary, and I would not tolerate any comments about my appearance. Sunday arrived with a mix of anxiety and cautious hope. My parents' house looked the same as always, imposing and perfectly maintained, a physical manifestation of their desire for flawless appearances. My mother answered the door. Her expression an unreadable mask of politeness. Abigail, thank you for coming. The formality between us was painful but not surprising. We had never had the kind of easy affection that I observed in other mother-daughter relationships. Jessica and Bradley were already seated in the living room, and my father stood by the fireplace, looking uncomfortable but determined. The atmosphere was tense, everyone aware of the unresolved conflict hanging between us. After stilted small talk about the weather and Jessica's charity work, my mother cleared her throat. Abigail, we asked you here because, well, we owe you an apology. The words were so unexpected that I momentarily wondered if I had misheard. Your sister has helped us understand that our approach to your situation has been misguided, my father added. We thought we were protecting you. From what? I asked, keeping my voice steady. My parents exchanged glances. From the cruelty of others, my mother finally said. From stares and comments and rejection. But you were the ones making me feel rejected. I pointed out. Every time you suggested I cover up or stay out of photos or consider another surgery. My father looked genuinely surprised. We never meant to make you feel that way. We were trying to make your life easier. By teaching me to be ashamed of my body? The conversation that followed was difficult, with moments of defensiveness from my parents alternating with glimpses of genuine regret. They had viewed my scars exclusively as a burden, an obstacle to overcome rather than a part of me to accept. Their perspective was so ingrained that even now, trying to apologize, they couldn't quite grasp how deeply their attitudes had affected me. I saw your exhibition, my mother said eventually. Jessica took us. Those photographs were illuminating. That's one word for it, my father added awkwardly. You've clearly found a way to make use of your experience. It wasn't a complete understanding, but it was more acknowledgement than they had ever offered before. I recognized that this dinner represented the limits of what they could currently comprehend, that for them, seeing my scars as anything other than a tragedy required a fundamental reshaping of deeply held beliefs. I don't expect you to suddenly see things differently, I told them as the evening drew to a close. But I do expect you to respect my choices about my body and my life. Can you do that? They both nodded, and my mother added, We're trying to understand, Abigail. It may take time, but we are trying. It wasn't the warm reconciliation part of me had hoped for. But it was an opening, a small crack in the wall of expectations and appearances that had separated us for so long. As the weeks passed, my blog continued to grow, attracting readers from around the country and even internationally. I received emails daily from people sharing their own stories of visible differences and the challenges of family acceptance. Michael and I officially launched the family support sessions, holding them twice monthly at the community center. Attendance was modest at first but grew steadily as word spread. Parents of children with birthmarks or scars came seeking guidance on how to build their child's confidence. Partners of veterans with new injuries asked how to provide support without pity. Siblings like Jessica occasionally attended, trying to understand their role in their family member's journey. 6 months after the garden party incident that had catalyzed so much change, I hosted an art exhibition of my own, not photographs this time, but a series of mixed media pieces exploring themes of transformation and resilience. The gallery was filled with members of our support group, friends like Rachel, colleagues from my design work, and even Jessica and Bradley. Michael stood beside me throughout the evening, his pride evident in every introduction, every shared smile. As the crowd thinned near closing time, he led me to a quiet corner of the gallery where one of my favorite pieces hung, a textured canvas where golden lines traced over red surfaces, creating a map-like pattern of beauty emerging from pain. "This is what I saw in you from the beginning," he said softly. "Not just survival, but transformation. The ability to create meaning from difficulty. It wasn't always there," I admitted. "For years I was just surviving. And now?" I smiled, thinking of all the changes of the past months, the blog reaching thousands, the support group expanding. My relationship with Michael deepening into something I had never thought possible for someone so accustomed to keeping others at a distance. "Now I'm finally living," I said simply. Our relationship had progressed slowly but steadily, built on mutual respect and shared understanding. Michael never treated my scars as something to overlook or overcome. They were simply part of me, like his were part of him. For the first time, I was with someone who truly saw all of me. As we left the gallery that night, walking hand in hand under the stars, I reflected on the strange, painful path that had led me here. A humiliating garden party had become the catalyst for reclaiming my story, for building connections based on authenticity rather than appearance, for finding my voice after years of attempted invisibility. My scars were no longer something to hide or explain away. They were proof of survival, markers of resilience. Part of the map that had brought me to this moment of genuine happiness and purpose. And for the first time in my life, I was truly grateful for the journey, every painful, beautiful step of it. So if you're watching this and struggling with visible differences, or if you love someone who is, remember that scars, whether physical or emotional, don't define us. They're simply part of our unique human landscape, evidence that we've lived, suffered, healed, and continued forward. The people who truly matter will see beyond the surface to the strength beneath. Have you ever stood up for yourself against family pressure? Or have you found unexpected support from strangers when you needed it most? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, our differences are not our limitations, but our distinguishing features on the map of life.